welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys. I'm your co-host, Daniel Torres-Dwyer. Hello, Christina Nicolau. Nice to see you.
Hi, Daniel. Very nice to see you as well.
Excellent. So the food environment is obviously going through changes, as most categories are, but I think that food is really something that affects our day-to-day lives. So how are you seeing this category evolve?
Well, there are a lot of trends that we see nowadays, and I guess most reports talk about the wellness trend and how consumers are more and more conscious about what they choose to eat and being more selective about the ingredients. At the same time, we see a lot more regulation coming our way as governments are trying to fight obesity and make sure that the consumers are well informed. So they do ask for full disclosure of the ingredients and the nutrition aspect of each of the products that we see in the supermarket shelves.
Yeah, and I think that this is obviously having an impact on branded FMCG foods companies. So I think we have a very interesting guest today to talk about the topic because she has a unique vantage point, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I love that Siobhán, our guest, she has a viewpoint from the scientific part, but as well as having the brand experience, the retailer experience, and now the consulting experience.
Exactly. So she is part of the consumer and retail team at Roland Berger. She's actually managing the UK for consumer and retail. Mm-hmm. And Roland Berger is the global strategy consulting firm which works with the main FMCG and retail brands globally.
Hi, I'm Siobhán Géhin. I lead the retail and consumer practice at Roland Berger in London. I'm delighted to be here today.
Thanks for joining us, Siobhán. Nice to see you again after greeting you at Shop Talk. Hopefully we'll make it again this year in Barcelona. Can you tell us a bit more about what it means to be the head of consumer at Roland Berger?
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel, with pleasure. And indeed, I will be at Shop Talk in Barcelona this year. So I look forward to seeing you again.
Picture coming up on LinkedIn soon.
Oh, fantastic. Retailers, we work with retailers and consumer goods right across the value chain, right from sourcing right through to consumer. And we work on strategy and operational topics. And some examples that I've been working on recently would be things like reinventing retail store formats, digital strategy, D2C strategy, and a lot of work around product portfolio innovation and on sustainability. So in essence, a lot of it is about helping companies to prepare and kind of future-proof their business, which I guess relates nicely to the topic of today, which is future-proofing your product portfolio.
And Siobhán, you have quite a rich career background from consulting to retail and brand. Could you tell us a little bit more about it and how those experiences you've had shaped your understanding of the FMCG world of today?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question, Christine. So, yeah, I studied biotechnology, which had quite a lot of food science in it, actually. So I've always had a deep passion, I think, about the whole food and beverage industry. And I started my career running production lines for Guinness first as a brewer and then with Mars. So I think that gave me a very strong operational grounding. And then I did my MBA at INSEAD and moved into more consumer-facing type roles. So I had a stint, quite a long stint with KFC, was running the research and development and new product development at KFC, and then ran the German business. So that's, was definitely a, very significant commercial role, and then moved into pure retail with Asda and with Home Retail Group, doing a bunch of different strategic and operational roles. So I think what that brings to my consulting kind of skill set is I've been on the other side of the table, so I know what it's like to have to, run a P&L, run a business, meet KPIs, etc. But plus, I think having an operational and a strategy hat's a nice combination, because strategy is brilliant. But I remember the former CEO of Walmart saying, execution trumps eat strategy for breakfast every time. So I think having strategies that you can implement, that I think is a real sweet spot.
Yeah, my grandaunt, so my grandmother's sister, also worked at the Guinness factory in Dublin. So
okay, you have to say brewery, Daniel.
Brewery, yeah.
It's art and science. It's not just sausages.
So it's funny that as an Irish person you started in the Guinness brewery, right?
Indeed.
And then you've had a fascinating career from there. Obviously, that's why you made it to the FMCG Guys podcast. So if not, you wouldn't be here.
Yes, well, it's nice. It's nice to come full circle and be talking about kind of healthy food, because that is certainly related to my original kind of where I started out.
Yeah. So what's the situation now in the foods industry? So obviously, we've been talking for years now about like going to healthier trends and like plant-based, et cetera, and obviously this change happening in the industry, but then there's also a lot of back and forth. Can you give us like a very top line picture of what is the scenario right now in terms of this transition into a healthier product portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in many ways it has some parallels with the whole sustainability evolution. But basically, food companies are under pressure from 4 key areas to really drive healthy eating in their product portfolio, and also to disclose the product's nutritional values and composition. So first, they're under pressure from governments and regulators, and the HFSS, foods that are high in fat, salt, and sugar in the UK. You've got Nutri-Score in Europe. There's Health Star in Australia. There's something else in Singapore. Many countries introducing regulations which essentially curtail businesses' ability to sell foods that are less than healthy. So, for example, in the UK, you can't advertise or do, kind of gondola ends or at the checkouts for high fat, salt and sugar foods. So in a way, I think, people sometimes say sugar is becoming the new tobacco, and that might be a bit extreme, but it is moving. The food industry is moving from being quite unregulated to being more regulated in this regard. The second area, of course, is consumers. So, there are consumers, and there always will be, who are either for, cash-strapped reasons or just their kind of life attitudes are less concerned. But there's a growing number of consumers who are more and more concerned about health. And you see all of these influencers from, Instagram. You see startups, well, rather a mature startup now like MyFitnessPal, which was bought by Nike. So people can, track their eating every day, and it's a bit like the whole Apple Watch thing as well. People have become quite, sort of scientific about their whole diet and approach to life. You've got things like Zoe, which is health tracking outfit run by a professor from UCL. You've got another startup, Thriva, which tailors your vitamins to your specific sort of body chemistry. So there's a lot of pushes in the background for consumers to want to be healthier. Then you've got all of these NGOs. So there's one group called ATNI, which publishes a nutrition report and ranks all of the large CPGs and how serious they are about nutrition on an annual basis. And then you have retailers. So retailers, and they're always at the coalface, so they are, often faster to, they have their finger on the pulse more with what consumers are thinking. So retailers are putting pressure on consumer goods companies, asking them for their data. The French retailers, are setting up, websites or have on their own websites some of the nutritional data. So if you're a CPG and you don't give the data as required, somebody will be making assumptions by looking at the back of your, pack labels, etc. So there's a whole load of pressures driving it. And then on the other hand, you have, how consumers behave. So you always have this thought to action gap. It's really big in sustainability, where people say, yeah, I care about sustainability, but then they go and they buy another fast fashion item. Well, it's a bit like that in food. I want to be really, really healthy, but on the other hand, I do not want my favorite brand to tamper with the taste and the mouthfeel and the pleasure sensation that I get from, I don't know, eating a bar of chocolate, my favorite candy brand or whatever it might be. So there's this real kind of dichotomy between doing the right thing and being pushed to do the right thing by so many forces on the one hand, and on the other hand, still having products that taste great for consumers and match their need for indulgence. And that's really, really challenging.
Efrain, you deal with a lot of data in your job. And in this time of omni-commerce, do you sometimes find yourself really not sure with what actions to take?
Absolutely. I think as the amount of e-com performance data only continues to grow, a lot of brands are going to face this challenge.
Well, you should check Commerce IQ. They're a pioneer that are helping consumer brands win in e-commerce by optimizing digital shelf and helping grow market share by driving real-time incrementality for retail media and maximizing Amazon sales, share, and profit.
Sounds really intriguing. How can people find out more?
Well, you should join the hundreds of FMCG brands that are already winning in e-commerce with Commerce IQ. It's as easy as visiting commerceiq.ai/FMCG guys or following the link in the show notes to schedule a demo and download their free AI-powered Chrome plugin to optimize your Amazon listings. Don't miss out. Take action today to unlock your AI-powered e-commerce success with Commerce IQ.
And you said a little bit on the first part about regulations, right? That we don't want to have so much impulse purchase of all these unhealthier, let's say, snacking that we're used to see next to the cashier. So do you see a change also in the way that the retail store is structured and how, rather than just the consumer part, is being changed? So Siobhán, on the first part with regulations, you mentioned a bit about impulse purchases of all these snacks. And I'm wondering how, apart from the consumer journey, yeah? Siobhán, on the first part, when you mentioned about regulations, you said a little bit about how we don't want consumers to do all those impulse purchases of snacks and unhealthier kind of foods. So I'm wondering, do you see the retail space in terms of how the stores are being structured changing and how the overall shopper journey is impacted rather than just the consuming part?
Definitely, Christine. So in the UK now, you are not allowed to display high-fat, salt, sugar foods in the store entrance, on gondola ends, or at the checkouts. So what you'll see now in the UK is just different products at the checkout. So sometimes you'll see more of the kind of healthy snack bars, or gums or low sugar gums, etc. So I mean that's a legal requirement. I think there was also a bit of consumer pressure because parents always found it difficult to say no to their kids when there was chocolate at the tills and so on. So I think there was a little bit of kind of pressure on the retailers anyway, but now the regulator's pressure is there. It's definitive, so you can't do it. And we'll see more of that in other markets, I think, as the regulations sort of mature.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about what retailers are doing about this, pushing healthier products? Are they actually doing it, or is it only a marketing stunt?
That's a great question. I think in terms of private label, retailers have always, particularly in chilled food and in some product categories, been quite innovative in bringing out things like plant-based and so on. So you'll definitely see some innovation in that sense, or lower salt, ready meals, etc. But then in other categories that are the kind of traditional HFSS categories, if you like confectionery and so on, very dominated by big global brands. So in some sense, the retailers have a little bit less influence. However, they are wanting to give more space to those kind of brands. So you do see those larger companies making healthier acquisitions, like Mars buying Kind, for example. So, and that's not just because of retailer pressure, but in the very branded areas, the retailer impact is part of a bigger equation, I think, where a lot of companies, CPGs, are pushing the healthier agenda, partly because of retail pressure, but partly because of other pressures.
But when it comes to the actual consumer and how we enable them to make the healthier options, you said also there is this thought to action gap, but part of it, I do believe that it falls within the hands of the whole network, right? And how we make those offerings affordable and make sure that consumers can have the same access to it compared to the sugar options, for example. Sweeteners versus sugary options. Sometimes you see that the ones that do not contain sugar might be more expensive. So what's your take on this? Are we really doing our part as an FMCG ecosystem?
That's a great question. And, sugar is pretty much the cheapest ingredient you can get, is the cheapest calories. And that's, one of the reasons why, sadly, you see higher levels of obesity and lower socioeconomic groups, which is really, I think a really big social problem, even apart from an industry problem. So CPGs are innovating, but anytime if you replace sugar with sweeteners, there's an expense thing, but there's also an impact on mouthfeel and the kind of texture, and what else do you use to bulk it up? Because sugar versus aspartame, sugar's got a lot of bulk, whereas aspartame's quite a small quantity of ingredient. Plus, if you replace then sugar by something like a date paste, that's, I don't know, off the top of my head, probably twice, if not 3 times as expensive as sugar. So there's a lot of innovation happening. And I know that some of the CPG clients that I talk to have developed many, healthier variants, tested them in consumer panels, and the consumers say, no, I want the taste to be just like my favorite product, and I want it to be healthier. So it's really, really challenging. And I think some of it is going to happen via M&A and almost healthier brands developing in parallel with the sort of heritage brands. But I think the whole question of, do you try to take your whole product portfolio and make it all a bit healthier, or do you keep some kind of indulgence in your portfolio and then have a healthier sort of set of a subcategory in your overall portfolio? I mean, that's a really big strategic question for CPGs, actually.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about this? Like, how are they facing the challenge? Because ultimately, when you eat, it's not like, I mean, I have a friend that says that he would rather take a pill and be full than eating, because he doesn't really enjoy the eating experience. But for most of us mortals, we like the experience of eating, right? So we want food to taste good. So you have like good unhealthy, tasty unhealthy, and healthy tasteless kind of dichotomy, which is not true, obviously. But how can FMCG companies thrive in that? Because the risk that I see is that the branded CPG companies and foods could lose a lot of space to like natural products like vegetables, fruits, rice, pasta, like things that are not or less processed than like a chocolate bar or a soup pill. Well, not a pill, you know what I mean?
Powder.
Yeah, exactly. So how can they survive within that dichotomy?
Well, I think, first of all, you raise a really important point about your friend who does seem to be a bit of an outlier, who'd rather eat a pill. But I think something that gets overlooked in this, and I know it is on the minds of some of the CPG clients I deal with, is the whole emotional role that food plays in our lives. You think of all the big celebrations that we have, religious, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Sunday lunch, whatever it might be. There's a whole special thing about having food around the table with your family or with your family and friends and loved ones. So, food has an emotional kind of feel-good role in our lives anyway. And sometimes I think a lot of this debate can be a little bit reductive. And that's a difficult message to I think, get across. But coming back to your thing about, the whole industry shifting and more fresh, unprocessed foods, I think that really leads nicely into the whole thing about the ultra-processed food debate, because there's, you may have seen the book, Ultra-Processed People, and it's got a lot of publicity in the last few months, and which effectively outlines the hypothesis, and there's some scientist in Brazil, I think it was, who's categorized all food into 5 categories, from completely unprocessed, like a banana, to very, very, very highly processed. And the hypothesis, which is contested by some scientists, is that the more processed the food is, the worse it is. And I think that thinking, which has a lot of merit in my view, it is also potentially going to change the way that people think about food. So I think you're right. There is a risk that fresh food might take a bigger space in grocery aisles, etc. But I'm not sure. I think for a CPG, first of all, you have to be really on top of what your customers are thinking, what the kind of leading edge customers are thinking, or the kind of predictors for where things are going to go in the future. And make the acquisitions, make the bold moves, move into different categories, like Coke buying Innocent, for example, whatever it might be, to preempt some of these structural changes and not, allow your category to die, or if your category is beyond maturity, allow yourself to be overexposed to that category. You have to react and be at the forefront.
And there's this other big trend, apart from healthier food, which connects a little bit with sustainability and how our consumers are now a bit more aware of the whole supply chain and where the product is coming from, how has it been produced. Where do you see this trend linking with the healthier food one? And do you see that there is going to be a bigger space even more regulated, that's going to kind of like steer the wheel in a different direction?
No, absolutely. It's a great question. And what I see with some clients consider nutrition as a subset of sustainability, because in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, getting rid of world hunger and malnutrition is part of it. Really the question we're talking about today is arguably sort of overnutrition rather than malnutrition, and overeating rather than undereating. But in any case, some businesses think about that as part of the sustainability agenda. Others think about it completely separately. But I think if you think about buying a pack and labeling and information, you're effectively going towards a world where many consumers are very curious about the provenance, about the sustainability, about the nutritional value. And there, have been some discussions about having a kind of a super label. I've forgotten, there's a name for it, a label, like a QR code that you could scan. Something like, what Burberry has on their coats, you scan a QR code and you can see the factory. But, something you can scan where you can see the sustainability history, how like people are being treated in the factory. Yeah, like a kind of super label. I think that's a while away, but when you think of all the levels of information that are trying to be crammed into one pack, and the various legal requirements from the nutritional side and from the sustainability side, there probably is a need to have some kind of digital solution. Interestingly, we were speaking yesterday about how, in the fashion industry, the push is towards a kind of a digital product passport for every product, and that's being really pushed by European regulations. So I think we'll see the consumer goods industry going the same way. And I think my gut feel, I haven't done the research exactly on this, but that the customer is very concerned about sustainability, probably has a fairly high overlap with the customer is very concerned about nutritional values and healthy eating.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think it's quite relevant. We can all think of like the type of client avatar, no?
Indeed, exactly. Yeah.
And apart from the regulations that are coming this way, right, and that are kind of like might force you into a super label and try to disclose even more information or even change a little bit the formulas of what you're selling in your mix, do you see that there are long-term benefits for business going that way, apart from what we've already discussed? Like, why would the business choose to do that and not be forced?
That's a great question. Well, we've all seen the trend of premiumization over time, and it's a very good way to get more percentage margin and more cash margin from a category. So it is in line with a premiumization trend. However, I think what effectively this whole transition will entail will be lower volumes at higher value. And that's a kind of a scary prospect, because you kind of want to have both if you're the consumer goods company. So the pace of pushing that premiumization would not be as fast if it was happening without the regulatory pressure. I think the regulatory pressure is kind of pulling the rug under some of the ability to sell core product categories. While I think if it was happening more organically or on a business basis, the core product categories would chunder along and you'd be testing some, more premium products. And let's face it, a lot of customers cannot afford or would be deterred by the price point of the more premium products. So you probably wouldn't really do it at the same pace without the regulation, to be quite frank.
You're right. Though we do see, for example, sugar tax is being implemented across many countries, right? Where ultimately the out-of-pocket cost for the sugary ones products are going to go high as well. Therefore, we see an overall rise in prices across all different kinds of foods, apart perhaps from the fresh produce, as Danny was saying before.
Yeah, exactly. So very much like, alcohol or cigarettes. So having a deterrent in that way, which in some ways makes sense. In some ways, it would be good to make the much more expensive, healthier products more accessible to people, actually, rather than making the cheaper ones also more expensive, which basically for families who are struggling, it's effectively just pushing up the food bill one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are a lot of markets where fresh fruit and vegetable is really expensive. Like for the lower income families, it's like practically non-accessible, and it's easier to buy like a ready meal or very processed canned foods or whatever. Which doesn't happen here in South Europe. It's more like in actually richer economies in the north of Europe or in the US.
Indeed. And of course, it is possible to make, ready meals, for example, or processed foods that are healthier. They're not, every ready meal is not the same in terms of its nutritional composition. And there are many which are more like, the typical ingredients you would find in your kitchen, but assembled and potentially a little overcooked, quite often with too much salt. But it is possible to do it in a healthier way, but then of course also adding some cost.
Yeah, you talked before about the role of influencers and startups having an impact on consumers looking for healthier products or healthier alternatives. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think there's really a whole ecosystem now, isn't there, where, I mentioned the Apple Watch or the MyFitnessPal, where people are, starting to almost like be able to track the kind of chemistry of your body, or even all of the movement now where, the menopause has come into the sort of public arena as a really hot topic, no pun intended, and something where people are starting to realize the role of estrogen in women's health and so on. So I think the customer now is so much more educated and hearing so much of this on the TV, on Instagram. Zoe, I've mentioned as one example. So there's definitely a kind of subset of consumers who are really becoming so much better informed than they were even 2 years ago, 5 years ago. It's moving really, really fast in this almost kind of scientific approach. And you actually see it in the beauty industry where, everybody's talking now about retinol and hyaluronic acid, which, I couldn't pronounce 5 years ago, but now it's all about like, I really, it's not anymore, because I'm worth it, which might have, been a great tagline 20 years ago. It's really about, I want to understand why this thing works for me. So I think the consumer now is becoming much more probing and discerning. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons why plant-based food has had such a, a kind of an initial hype and then a drop off. I think there are, for me, kind of two reasons, well, maybe two, but one is that the taste didn't really live up to the hype. But secondly, it's touted as being very healthy, and it's healthy to eat plant-based and it's better for the environment, etc. But then when you look at the list of ingredients, often it's quite daunting and it's quite hard as a layperson to be able to say, well, is this really healthy, or is this, a sort of a strange chemical cocktail? So I think that whole drive towards customers being more informed, I think, is a big shift in the food industry.
Siobhán, I have a question which is, let's say, close to what we're discussing, which is more, let's make things less unhealthy, towards the additional nutritional benefits that we see being added, like all the functional drinks. For example, I've seen some coffee that's infused with vitamins, right? And they say like, people forget to take their supplements, but no one forgets to drink their coffee. So you might as well get some with your coffee, or having vitamin water. I'm wondering, do you see also a trend towards that way in the short or long-term future?
Oh my gosh, it's a whole, vitamins and supplements market and the protein supplements market, have all been growing incredibly fast. And it's not my kind of core industry that I've worked in a lot, but from what I've seen, it's also becoming much more, I would say, kind of micro-targeted. So the biggest growth part was protein powders for a long time, and more around kind of bodybuilding. But now it's becoming a lot more targeted, so like the thing that you take if you've got a digestion problem, or the thing that you take if you're over 50, or if you're pregnant, or there's so many more types of vitamins and supplements now. And then of course I guess you're really asking about fortified foods, which I think is a kind of a spillover of that into kind of creating a ready to drink coffee that has some functional benefits as well. And then, of course, there's the whole debate about, there are some scientists who say, well, taking vitamin supplements doesn't really make sense because you should eat a healthy diet that gives you all of those in the fruit and veg anyway.
Unless you're Daniel's friend and you'd rather just have the pill.
Yes, Daniel's friend would rather just have the pill, or the people in between who'd rather eat pretty healthily but might just pop a few supplements just in case.
Yeah, that's true. So obviously a lot of work that you're doing, Siobhán, in this space. It's a fascinating space, isn't it? Because the possibility of having like a healthier diet, a healthier lifestyle is there, but there's also the choice of not having a healthy lifestyle and a healthy diet is also there. So it's a fascinating debate because it's like regulation, brands, consumers, like it's really a topic that I love. So thanks for this, Siobhán. It was super interesting.
Pleasure.
Wanted to ask you now about your career, which we talked about at the beginning, starting at the Guinness Brewery. I've learned my lesson now. If you went back to the younger self at the beginning to your younger self at the beginning of your career, with everything that you've learned on the way, what would be that one piece of advice that you would give yourself?
My one piece of advice would be believe in yourself and be confident and forceful from the word go. And I see it a lot. I do a lot of work with our consultant population, with the female consultant population in particular, and somehow building confidence doesn't seem to come as naturally to some people, and particularly to women. And that was certainly the case for me. I was, really overwhelmed in a very male-dominated industry at the time, and absolutely just go for it, believe in it, speak up. If in doubt, say something, because if you're not saying anything, you're not really playing safe. You're actually playing the kind of that person has nothing to say role. So I would say to people, just go for it, believe in yourself, be confident, be brave.
This was Siobhán Géhin from Roland Berger. Very interesting conversation, Christina. I think that her unique vantage point didn't disappoint, did it?
Oh, it didn't disappoint for sure, Daniel. I think everything was in line with our kind of hypothesis at the beginning, right? That we see this wellness trend and that there is a lot more push for brands to lean towards healthier options within their portfolio. I loved how she summarized it in 4 main pressure points. In terms of both having the healthier portfolio, but also giving full disclosure when it comes to the nutrition aspects of its product, with the first one being regulation and government, which is something that we would expect. The second one being the consumer trend. So yes, consumers do care, therefore you care about it. But then there were the number 3, which was NGOs, and indeed there is a lot more activity of different NGOs pushing governments for more regulation. And then there is the 4th part, which is actually retailers, as they do care about the people who come and shop, and they want to make sure that they provide the right level of information to them. Therefore, retailers also push brands, especially about getting more data and more information about the nutritional aspect of their products.
Yeah, what I found super interesting is that she mentioned the role of M&A in terms of these big food FMCG companies that we all know to really adapt to this changing market. M&A is kind of the place to be, more than changing their existing brand. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually a big fan of Dragon's Den and Shark Tank. And if you look at their episodes in the past few years, you see that there are a lot of entrepreneurs that come up with healthier options or alternatives for various snacking offerings, right? So I think that there is a lot of work happening with smaller companies and people who have and they're just actively trying. People that have found this problem in their lives and they are actively trying to solve it, and they come up with new exciting ideas. So there is a way through M&As for big brands to find some established and tested solutions rather than going all the way from scratch with R&D.
Yeah, which could be interesting to organize a special podcast series of the Shark Tank by the FMCG guys. So if you're a small foods company that's innovating, fmcgguys.com, and then you go to contact, we'll be in touch, or you can contact us through LinkedIn. Also, she linked it to premiumization, which I thought was interesting, more healthy.
It's very interesting. Yes, because there is a unique value chain to these products as new ingredients are coming along. So yes, there are a lot more expensive options, and you know that people who are more eager to explore, they might also be willing to spend the premium on these products. But as I said, it's not all good news, is it? Because then you go a lot down in volume, and at the end of the day, when you're in the FMCG industry, you don't want to be selling a Ferrari. You need volume, you need to have your factories going, and you need your consumers to have affinity with your brands through experiencing your brands. Yeah,
and ultimately, if you're purpose-driven and you really want to change society through your brands, you have to make it. You have to make it have an impact through reaching a lot of people. So you have to make it available to a large mass of the population.
Available and accessible.
Exactly. That was the word. Thanks, Christina. And thanks to our listeners as well for joining us. As always, remember, you can follow our LinkedIn page by searching the FMCG guys. If you change the FMCG guys for the CPG guys, you'll find our sister podcast on the other side of the Atlantic, bringing all kinds of commerce-related content from the US and North America in general. And yeah, if you have any feedback, remember, you can always get in touch with us. We will reply. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next episode.